There was nothing but cells and restraints down the bottom floor. Just a small armory with nothing worth our while. Job's voice was stern but bore the slightest hint of remorse as he addressed Team Alpha. Tamara. I know, she answered. We will keep looking for the final child, but you said it yourself. The odds of them surviving with that wound are slim to none. We can at least find the body and maybe score a little payback while we are here, Trish muttered as she guarded the front stairwell. Roger that, Tamara replied. Job knew she was a veteran and could handle the stress, but he could not help but feel a hint of guilt for dragging her into this mess. It was her connections that helped place him into Blake's unit and jumpstart his short-lived career in the military. Yet now that she returned home, she finds a new war. An endless war. How is the door coming along? Almost got it, Blake answered. Tammy, swap with Trish and cover the stairwell. Bust it open, Blake, Job ordered as he moved to the corner of the barricaded door and readied his rifle. With a loud pop and a creak, the door slowly opened, releasing a giant wave of must and mildew into the air. The air inside was thick with an unsettling humidity, tinged with the acrid scent of chemicals and something more organic, almost primal. Small sparks illuminated the room as they emanated from a small hexagon-shaped stone in the center of the wooden desk at the heart of the room. Lining the walls were rows of large cylindrical tubes filled with a thick, lime-yellow fluid that seemed to glow with an unnatural luminescence. Suspended within these tubes were strange, otherworldly plants. Their chitin-like bark was rough and black, exuding an almost insectoid appearance. Each plant's body was riddled with dozens of small spinal branches that twisted and contorted, resembling grotesque skeletal legs. These appendages twitched occasionally, as if responding to an unseen stimulus. Some were of various lengths and sizes, with the larger among them bearing a shell-like bulb at the very end of the centipede-like body. Its base extended out of a few inches of sand-like particles nestled at the bottom of the jar. Job counted at least 36 of the strange glass jars scattered across the room, but only 8 of them possessed these unusual insect-like plants. All of the rest were stained with the grimy yellow taint of the fluid, but were now empty. Check out that device, Job said to Blake as he nodded toward the glowing stone. Tammy, come take a look at this. Trish stared closely at one of the insect-like plants within the jar. This is nasty. I think it's moving. Don't touch anything, Blake muttered as he moved toward the center table. I don't want one of those things getting out. Lord have mercy, Tamara muttered as she swapped spots with Job. This is like something out of a science fiction movie. Or a hentai, Trish said poignantly. Thanks for the nightmare, Trish, Tamara replied as she began to examine one of the specimens. But these things are not growing out of that sand, she said as she examined it further. No electrical charge at all, Blake mumbled in confusion as he pulled the multimeter away from the hexagonal stone. Don't touch it, Blake, Job said from the other room. Weren't you an engineer or something? Trish asked as she bit into a protein bar. This is clearly alien. It's not alien, Blake replied as he grabbed one of the empty mason jars. It might just be building up a charge from something in the air, and glass is a good insulator. What do you say, Commander? They aren't buried in the sand, Tammy observed. These little bastards are shitting it. Take the stone, Job ordered. But we are not bringing anything else. Roger that, Tamara muttered as she stepped away from the jar to the sound of a thunderous crash in the distance. Quickly, the team readied their weapons as their eyes spotted movement from one of the large insect-like plants wiggling its moist centipede-like body within the confines of the glass jar. The hard shell-like bulb on the end trembled and writhed in place before freezing in utter stillness. Then, with a sudden snap, the bulb opened to reveal the tiny fist-sized face of a nightmarish amalgam of insect and baby. Rapidly, in the matter of seconds, the infant-like features of the horrific creature twisted and aged into that of an enraged and demented old man, whose fixed and angry gaze pierced at Tamara before releasing a nightmarish shriek that shattered the glass around them. Everyone out! Blake yelled. We got movement outside. Job shouted as he readied his rifle while 4 of the vagrants rushed up the stairwell. I got entrance point. Tammy on me, Trish on rear guard. Blake, light it up. We push through this, he ordered. Where those little shits go? Trish held her sword at the ready as she urgently searched the area. Fire in the hole! Blake shouted as he readied the thermite grenade. The first of the vagrants charged up the stairwell below with feral and demented ferocity, but its progress was short-lived as a bullet from Job's rifle struck the side of his temple and his body fell limp to the ground. The luck of the second vagrant allowed him to breach a good 3 steps further before a short burst of fire from Job's scar struck soundly into its chest. 4 more rushed upward in rapid succession. 1 charged forward on all 4s as its frail and bony limbs hurled it up several steps at a time. Job fired rapidly at 2 cluttered together as the fire of the thermite exploded behind him. Pai! Job yelled the command as the leaping vagrant released a loud, feral shriek as it closed in on the group. But charging from the corner of the stairwell was the muscular form of Kiona, who rushed into the fray and with a leaping bite, snatched the arm of the attacker and dragged it to the ground. 2 more charged past Kiona as Tamara opened fire. The first shot struck into its shoulder as the second 2 rounds hit into its abdomen. She fired a 4th final shot to the head for good measure. We can't stay here, Blake said to Job as he readied his assault rifle. We push through, Job shouted. Tammy and Blake take point. Walter, come in. But there was only silence. Walter, come in, Job shouted in vain as he turned to the vagrant squirming and flailing by Kiona, and with 1 shot to the head, it moved no more. Blake could feel the heat from the thermite quickly spreading up the upper level. He saw far too closely that horrific childish face attached to that centipede-like beast. A frightening nightmare of creased and moist skin aging within seconds to an elderly and demon-like visage. No, even in his nightmares, he would not dare to dream of such a thing. But Blake remembered finding Job's naked body outside that cave in Afghanistan, the only POW to escape that hell. Blake had seen the struggles many survivors dealt with upon escaping such an ordeal, but he had never seen anyone stricken by such primordial terror as his soldier, Job, when he found him that day so many years ago. Job only said one thing. I saw the devil in there. Shit. Wally, Tammy whispered, as she proceeded down the stairs with Blake at her side. Stay in the moment, Blake said sternly as the 2 approached the door below. He just hoped that whatever they saw upstairs would not reopen his friend's old wounds. The wounds that cannot be seen are often the hardest to heal. Movement from both sides. Stay in the moment, Blake reminded himself as a feral man with long, stringy hair rushed toward them with a hatchet in hand just feet away. Tamara stepped in quickly, and with a hard push kick, she sent the vagrant tumbling back. But before the maniac could regain his footing, Blake fired several shots into its chest and 1 to the head. Tamara quickly crouched as the second vagrant rushed from the right, but Blake swept around and fired 2 shots into it before a 3rd shot rained down from above. Job's bullet struck cleanly through the vagrant's head. Good job, killer, Blake thought to himself. Do what you do best, Job. Keep your cool and take your shot. When it comes to the kill shot, Job never missed. Team Alpha reached the bottom of the stairwell as the fire continued to spread and consume the floor above. To the left, they could see the exit to the main office, but obstructing their escape were at least 7 deformed vagabonds lumbering toward them in an unnaturally fearless and rapid charge. Clear to the right, Tamara shouted. It's barricaded, Job quickly answered. Blake shrugged. Then we only have one way out. Quick and clean. Job was interrupted by a deafening alien-like shriek from above. Fire! Job yelled as the feral vagrants charged forward. Blake, Tamara, and Job fired in unison, first targeting the closest foe with multiple rounds aiming to the center of the body, firing up the spine. Blake didn't know if it was the drugs or something more nefarious that pushed these madmen forward, but they absorbed enough bullets to drop a wild animal before collapsing to the ground, providing just enough time and cover for the horde behind them to push toward the hunters. Trish! Job shouted as he stepped back to reload his weapon. Pai! Job whispered to the dog at his side. Blake grabbed his kukri as he contemplated Job's trust in this would-be Olympian fencer. How would she handle it outside of the world of sport and competition, but in the life-or-death struggle of true battle? But before he could draw his blade, she gracefully rushed past him with her katana at the ready. "Finally!" she shouted as the first one violently lunged toward her, only to have its arm fall limp as her blade quickly sliced its tendon at the elbow, and in that moment of exposure, her sword struck again, gashing its throat wide open. "Reload!" Job shouted as two feral vagrants jumped at Trish. One bearing a rusty cleaver chopped wildly at her, but her sword arched up, nimbly parrying the wide blade before quickly counterattacking and slicing their stomach wide open. As the second vagrant lunged to overbear her, she quickly sidestepped to the left, keeping him just out of arm's length for the briefest of moments. This was all the time she needed to plunge her blade into its chest. She turned to face the final attacker, who was struggling under the grip of Kiona's mighty jaws that tore at its jugular. But multiple rounds fired past her as the rest of Team Alpha, with freshly loaded weapons, unleashed on the lone target. "He was mine," she muttered in anger. "No time." Blake barked at her and then gave her a quick pat on the back. Job might be right about these misfits after all. "Walter, come in, damn it!" Job shouted. "This is Walter," they heard panting over the radio. "Cujo. Freaking. Cujo is here. We got the kid," Faye shouted over Walter's radio. "But he could use a hand," Michael was briefly heard before a loud thud silenced him. Blake reconsidered his assessment of the group. "Extract now," Job ordered. "Pick us up at the southern lot. Over and out." "What the hell is that?" Tamara shouted as she stared down at one of the corpses. The stringy-haired vagrant's body slowly convulsed as its mouth gasped open in an audible squeal. Then, a long, moist mandible snapped out of its cheek, as wiggling through its open orifice was what appeared to be the bloody and whimpering face of a small child. Its body was attached to a long, centipede-like body as it crept and scratched its way out of the open mouth. "Eee," Trish said quietly as her blade slowly pressed into the squirming, centipede-like creature's head. For several seconds, it violently squirmed, thrashed, and wiggled before finally collapsing. Blake turned to the unmoving Job. His eyes were frozen like glass as they peered down in a mesmerized trance at the dead creature. "We need to go," Blake whispered. But still, Job did not move. He did not even blink as he remained fixated on the unmoving insect-like corpse. "Soldier!" Blake shouted. "Time to go home." With a gentle softness, the blood-stained tongue of Kiona licked Job's hand. Slowly, he nodded and finally turned away. "Yes, home," he mumbled. "My son. I got to go see. My son, hell am I." Job rambled to his dog as he pulled a burner phone from his pocket, a phone that Blake had seen Job examine countless times before but never once answered or used. Job continued to stare at the phone for a long, silent moment. Then, with a sudden turn, he marched for the door. Blake remembered hearing about Job's discharge after surviving that ordeal within that cave. Tamara told him that Job did not return home. He did not return to his friends or his family. He wandered, a broken shell of the soldier and man he was before. Probably not much different than the dead souls they left to burn within that school. But it was not his friends or his family that guided him out of that cave of darkness that imprisoned his mind for years after his body had escaped. It was all because of one person who found him and demanded to learn the truth. One woman who convinced him to live again. It was Job's wife, Sarah.